My name is Jack Balasia. I am an adjunct professor in oil and gas law at the University of Texas Law School. I'm also the executive director of the K. Bailey Hutchison Energy Center, one of the sponsors of Energy Week, and I'm glad to be here to introduce this next panel. You know, whether we like it or not, energy and law are inextricably tied. You really can't have an effective energy business without a full understanding and appreciation of the legal ramifications of whatever project or issues you are addressing. Understanding that relationship, the relationship between energy and law, is the job of the Texas Journal on Oil, Gas, and Energy Law, TJOGEL, as we familiarly call them. I'm pretty proud of what this journal has done in the last 20 years, and 20 years is a long time. There are probably people on the journal now who were not born when it started 20 years ago. I was, but anyway, what they do is incredible, and they are celebrating their 20th anniversary today. I'm pretty proud to say that the current officers of the journal were all students of mine. So I have a particular amount of pride about what this journal does and what it accomplishes. Let me introduce the panel. Our moderator today is Brandon Seale, the former president of West Texas Gas Utility. The panelists are Becky Diffen, who's a partner at Norton Rose Fulbright, Austin Lee, partner at Bracewell and Patterson. Excuse me, Bracewell. Just shows how old I am. Cynthia Martinez, Senior VP and General Counsel of energyRe, and Chad Smith, who is a partner at Kirkland and Ellis. I'm really glad all you lawyers were able to get away today. I know there's a lot of pressure on you to bill your hours, so thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. And I'm going to now turn it over to our moderator, Brandon.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it, Jack. Yeah, this is an $8,000 panel right here going on, these hourly rates. So as Jack alluded to, we all met each other on the Texas Journal of Oil, Gas, and Energy Law about 20 years ago. And so for the last 20 years, we've all had very blessed careers kind of riding this wave of energy prosperity that we've experienced. But I want to take people back, at least initially, to 2003, 2004, to these years, because all of us also were born or grew up in the 80s. And the oil business in the 1980s in Texas was not a good place to be. In the 1990s in Texas was not a good place to be. Nobody went into the oil business between 1985 and 2000 pretty much. And you know, it's really important, I think, and worthwhile diving in, you know, even deeper to the socioeconomic impact of that as well too. You know, that Texas had double-digit unemployment for a decade from the 80s and 90s. Nobody bailed out the oil business. Nobody bailed out our banks. I mean, it was something that, you know, left our housing stock in ruins. My family, we moved 10 times before I was 18 years old, and, you know, lost our house after making payments on it for 13 years. So in face of like that trauma, I kind of want each of the panelists to talk about what made them want to pursue something in energy law when that was not necessarily an advisable decision, at least in 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7, when we were coming out of school, but also kind of your specific journeys through energy law to the point where you are today.
Yeah, certainly. So I guess I'll start on my end. So I was in law school around the years of the big downturn, 2007, 2008. And as I was kind of looking what I wanted to do coming out of law school, a couple of things. One, I can remember, maybe it was you, Becky, even like coming and talking to one of our like 1L classes about TJOGEL and energy. And I'd had a couple of friends of my parents that worked with oil and gas companies. And so I'd kind of gotten to know them a little bit. And I just, you know, there was something almost kind of like romantic about the wildcatter, and there's something just like that kind of ideology to get out there that was still kind of around. But then as I was looking going forward, I mean, the shale revolution was starting, and it really seemed like that was one area of the economy that was actually doing well and kind of, you know, bailing out a lot of what was going on in the market more generally. And so that was kind of where I decided to, you know, at least, you know, take a shot at my career coming out of law school.
Sure. And so I had a little bit different exposure to it. I had no exposure to the oil and gas business growing up, and went here to UT to do the PPA program, and came out as an accountant working as a CPA, and really hated every second of it. And at the time, you know, gas was, you know, moving up pretty hard, and one of my friends said, well, why don't you just, if you're going to law school, why don't you just come be a landman? And I didn't really even know what that was, but they took me on, and I worked a crew out in East Texas for Chesapeake, and it was my first exposure to the business, and I just fell in love with it. The deal-making aspect of it, just the tangible nature of being able to go out and, stand on the property that you're about to lease and talk to the people who own it, and those relationships that come from, the business relationship that you're creating. So when I came to UT for law school, I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and lucky for me, the shale revolution was going, and that was, an easy thing to get a job in because there was so much work going on, and it was really, elevated type of work as far as M&A goes and the different deal structures that were, coming into the business that hadn't been there before because of all of the momentum that industry had.
So for me, when I was in college, I went to work for the summer at King & Spalding as a project assistant in Houston, and I had never thought about energy at all, but when I got to the law firm, I noticed that all of the clients seemed to be in the energy business. So I thought, wow, this is something, if I want to be a lawyer in Houston, maybe I should think about this a little bit. And one of the coolest things they were working on was LNG. I thought, whoa, that's, really an impressive thing, very complex and interesting. And so that was really the spark initially, is, what is this thing that makes the whole world go round that we totally take for granted every day? And then the other thing that happened was Al Gore put out The Inconvenient Truth, which was like a documentary and a book, and started thinking about climate change. And I thought, wow, I would really like to work on renewable energy. And so that was when I came to UT, I thought, that's what I want to try to focus on. So.
Yeah, and I found my way through a Daily Texan ad. I was looking for a summer internship during undergrad, and I saw this posting for a company in Austin called Texas Wind Power Company. And this is 2002, so wind was not a thing that anyone was talking about, but I had heard of these wind turbines, and I was like, well, that sounds interesting. And so I went and ended up working for them full-time for a few years, and learned the wind development industry. And so then when I went to law school, as these guys all know, I was all about renewable energy, but everyone thought I was kind of weird because of that. Because in the late 2000s, saying I was going to spend my entire career focused on renewable energy, and at the time it really was just wind. We really weren't doing solar, and we certainly weren't doing storage yet. People thought that was super niche, and be very careful about putting all your eggs in that basket, which generally is good advice, but I think, kind of saw, at least hoped I saw where the industry was likely to go.
Becky, by the way, literally writes the wind law book now, and so she's being a little modest about it. But actually, all of you, having known you all for a long time, you were always very intentional about what you wanted to do, and you've been able to direct your careers along those lines. So I hope you can be a good spokesman kind of for this next question. I feel like the geoscientists, the engineers, the finance bros, they get a lot of the glamour in this business. I want y'all to speak to what has been the role of Texas lawyers specifically, I guess, in propelling forward the last 10, 15, 20 years of energy in Texas. You want to start, Becky, or you?
Sure. Well, I think on my side of things, one thing people don't always think about is how important policy is, right? And so lawyers have been heavily involved in all the policy, and notwithstanding the current state of affairs for a very long time, most of what was happening in renewables, and certainly wind in Texas, was being driven by Republicans who said this is an amazing opportunity. And so one of the very first things that we did that ended up being a very legal process was we built $7 billion worth of transmission lines out to parts of the state in West Texas and the Panhandle that were the windiest areas in the country. And so lawyers played a tremendous role in that. We had built some wind in Texas. We had built enough wind in the 2000s that all the transmission lines that went out to those areas were congested. They weren't ever built to bring electricity in. They were meant to bring electricity out to those rural areas. And suddenly they were generating lots of electricity from wind, and the lines all got got too congested. And so the state legislature said, this is a problem we should fix. We want to build more wind. And we went through years and years of regulatory proceedings at the Public Utility Commission, all very much led by lawyers. And we went through a process where first we said, well, where are the windiest areas in the state? And then we said, okay, of those, which ones are the areas that the developers are most interested in building? And then they kind of found 5 different zones, and they said, these are the zones we're going to build to. And then they had to go through another process to say, well, what is the design of the lines? How big? How much should we build? Then all the electric utility companies who build the transmission lines got involved because they all wanted to get to build the new lines. So how were those going to get assigned? Who got to build what? And then every single one of those lines had to go through a proceeding called a Certificate of Convenience and Necessity to design the exact land that they were going to go through, because they were going to be taking that land from people who owned that land. And so it was just years and years of proceedings. If you knew what the word wind was, you were probably working on them in some way, shape, or form. And it has been a huge part of why we now have, I think we're closing in on 45 gigawatts of wind in the state because we built all of those transmission lines.
Keep going, Cynthia.
Yeah, I mean, and I think I would echo everything Becky said, and I think a lot of the work that was done in the wind industry also lent itself very well to the solar industry, as well as technology advanced and the cost came down and all of that. And I think Texas has just always been a great environment for energy and innovation and business and doing new things. So was pretty early on. I got to work on Boone Pickens wind farm, that ultimately, didn't actually pan out, but those were pretty early days. And moved to Austin in 2010 when, there was a lot of solar happening in Austin at that time. It's kind of like a hot spot. So, yeah, I mean, it's been a great place to be kind of at the forefront of the energy transition, for sure.
I mean, my experience is a little more on kind of the deal side of it. Chad and I are both deal lawyers, but the way that I think Texas has helped pioneer the M&A and the transactional landscape for energy law, at least on the traditional side that I can speak to, is, ever since the shale revolution got started, we've had different capital sources from private equity's always been a part of the energy business, but it got really focused on the energy business whenever things got really hot. And throughout our careers, we've really helped not just private equity, but other types of capital providers who have come into the space not really knowing some of the nuances and some of the jargon and some of the kind of idiosyncratic elements of upstream energy, helping them figure that out and translating that into deal docs, which I know that may not sound super awesome or sexy to a lot of people in the room, but it really is fun because you have to work with your clients, you have to understand their objectives, you have to understand their economic assumptions, and then usually, across the table you have somebody who, you have to kind of work with, and helping those different transaction structures like a traditional farm out agreement turn into what are called drillcos, which is really just a way to finance the development cost of drilling a bunch of wells, in a much more sophisticated set of terms is the way a lot of these agreements have evolved, and a lot of the different transaction structures that are used in the industry today, and which translate now into a lot of the transition work and some of these things. They're all borrowed from either other industries or other transaction structures. And so getting to be a part of that growth within the energy industry has been really rewarding.
Yeah, I would say it's surprising that, I've been practicing for only about 14 years, but it's been surprising how many different new products have been thought up by, folks on the business side, kind of similar. You were talking about the drillcos. Well, we had farm outs, but a drillco is similar, but it is very different. I can remember, working on some of the initial drillcos, and it was just like somebody came in with an idea. One of the private equity guys had an idea, and they're just kind of like, okay, the lawyers now have to figure this out. I can remember in 2019, again, particularly on the private equity side, they're always looking for either new sources of capital or new ways to finance these, to squeeze just a little bit more margin out of some of these assets. And I can remember, a bank and a client coming to us, and they're like, we want to do asset-backed securities with producing oil and gas wells. And they basically like, you guys got to figure this out. And so none of the traditional documents and things like that, which, securitizations are used across many, many other industries and have been for decades and very established, but the oil and gas assets are very different. And so we had to really start from scratch and thinking about new types of documents, new types of agreements, and just kind of figure out all the issues for the first time. And I think that it's been very interesting as I've seen kind of the industry as a whole get much more complex and sophisticated. And when Austin and I first started off, it was like every deal was done as an asset deal. You didn't do big company sales, or unless it was like public mergers, you weren't really selling companies in the oil and gas space. Now that's become commonplace. We used to see in these transaction documents when you're buying and selling companies, it was just kind of traditional indemnities and things like that. But over the last 5 years, all of a sudden, like a lot of other industries, everything's done with rep and warranty insurance, even in the upstream space. And so a lot of these things that we just have seen in a very short period of time, over 10 years or so, have really evolved in the space. And it's been fun as an attorney to get to work on those types of transactions and kind of be the first on a lot of these different structures in the space.
Yeah, on the point of the sophistication of the deals being done by Texas lawyers, when I was maybe a fourth-year associate, I had a partner scold me for using the word y'all. He said, do not use the word y'all. We don't want them to think we're a bunch of hick Texas lawyers. We want them to kind of think we're in New York. Because at the time, all the big deals were being done by New York lawyers. And if you were practicing in Texas, like it was a lower level thing. And ultimately, the client came back around and actually was like, because we were joking around, he's like, no, I love that. You please turn that on because you're going to help sweet talk them into doing this deal. But what we're doing now is, first of all, we're constantly doing deals under New York law, but we are doing deals interchangeably with Texas, New York, and around the country in a way that there's no such thing anymore of, the big deals are only done in New York. We are doing the absolute biggest deals straight out of Texas offices.
And I was going to say too, like Austin's kind of right. In some ways, there's nothing sexy about asset-backed securities or some of this stuff, but like, this really affects how capital flows, and it's a big difference. Texas had a colonial economy for hundreds of years, and like now, like the capital is forming in Houston and in Austin and in Dallas and in other places, and it's coming through those places and it's staying in those places, and you're seeing that in the contract forms and in the 10 million people that are projected to move here in the next 10, 15 years or whatever it is. And so I want to talk about too. So Cynthia, you brought up LNG, but what you didn't bring up or remind people of was what you were working on was importing LNG. And so I feel like that's a good reminder.
Yeah.
The first symposium that we planned on the Journal was about LNG in 2006. And it was about importing LNG because we were running out of energy in this country. Natural gas was running to $13. Oil was $157 a barrel. And how funny and quaint that seems now. And so I kind of wanted each of you, and Cynthia, maybe you want to start, just about, what have been the biggest surprises or changes in the energy landscape in your career?
I think that was really interesting for me, being in the early days of solar, people were talking about, the price of gas is just going to be going up and up, and so then solar is going to be more and more competitive. But what actually happened was for many years, then the price of natural gas was like cheap. And so, people saw that as an impediment to like the growth and competitiveness of solar and renewables. But anyway, it's just been interesting that, that didn't, pan out that way, the way people thought. But ultimately, renewables just kind of on their own, the costs came down and the adoption happened, over time, but just kind of a little later than maybe some projected back then. But yeah, it's been interesting. It's like, I think in energy, you never quite know what's around the corner, and there's always uncertainty. I think nowadays everybody's talking a lot about navigating the uncertainty, but for those of us who've been around for a little while, it's like, well, there's kind of always uncertain times. So
the rest of y'all talk about the biggest changes, surprises in your careers.
One of the things, I don't know if it's necessarily, it is a surprise the way that we've started to see the energy system evolve. Obviously, since COVID and the pendulum, it really swung one way, and now it's kind of swung back and maybe in favor of the other. But But all of this stuff, when you look at like AI and power demand and all this stuff, I think power is going to be a big catalyst to link a lot of these technologies. And it's, an all of the above type approach that I think everybody recognizes we're going to need. It's just been really neat to see it evolve and to be part of that evolution and to really appreciate what factors, solar and wind and traditional energy and, maybe one day hydrogen or maybe one day, geothermal and how they can all support the same goal, which is, making energy available, abundant, cheap, and safe to use.
I think it's also interesting how, like, what's old is new again. Like a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about at this conference and that frankly is taking up a ton of my time today is not anything new. It's just that it's actually finally getting traction. I remember one of the student articles on the journal when I was EIC in law school was like all about carbon sequestration, and it was something you'd kind of hear about and people were talking about it, but it seemed much more theoretical, at least on any kind of economic or large scale. And for the first 10 years of my career, there just wasn't that many, at least in the US, you really didn't see any of these projects. And now it's just like all over the place. We're working on massive projects, in the Midwest, on the Gulf Coast. There's just so many that have been greenlit, and I think you're seeing that with a lot of these different energy sources and technologies. A lot of this stuff was, talked about and people were kind of pushing it, but it really wasn't economic yet 10 years ago, and now it's just taking off, and it's kind of fun to see that kind of stuff that we were talking about, 10 years ago or when we were on the journal, and now it's finally
15 years ago, Chad.
Yeah, that's true. 15 years ago.
Yeah. No, I think mine, in line with what Austin was saying, is when we were first starting, when we were talking about renewables, we were like, how would we ever have more than 10% of the grid being run with renewables? Because they being intermittent and everything, and just to see the technology and the advancements of how we balance the grid, how we now have battery storage to smooth those peaks. Right as the sun comes up and everybody wakes up and turns everything on, and we have this big ramp up in ERCOT, suddenly batteries can help smooth us out just for those few hours. And then same thing when everybody gets home at the end of the day and turns everything on, and it can help smooth things out. And no one was thinking about, everybody was theoretically saying, yeah, we'd love to have storage, right? But not that it would be able to be done in any sort of like economic way. And yet look at what we're doing now, and we're mixing so many different types of fuel and types of generation. And that's what's most allowing us to weather all the different types of challenges we have, right? So during Winter Storm Uri, the fact that the sun was shining was huge because we had solar when all of the, gas plants were freezing. But then, we have other days where maybe it's really windy and that helps us through. And then, we want to build more gas plants, but we can't get the turbines right now. So we just had like 3 projects get canceled in the last couple of weeks because it's years out to be able to get the turbines in to build the new gas plants. So we have challenges in every different type of generation in building more. And so we can't just do it with any one, but being able to use a variety of different types of technology helps us as we run into different development challenges. And then once they are built, I think really helps run the grid when we have different options available, because we see, you look at the ERCOT profile every day and you see what is the most of the generation coming from, and it's totally different day to day depending on what's going on. And so I think having that variety and having the increase of all of the different types to me, has been really fascinating to watch.
So none of you said the shale revolution. I feel like that was the answer I was looking for. But was that like implicit in some of your answers kind of too? Was it somewhere there?
Yeah.
Let me piggyback off of what Becky was talking about. Because I kind of ask a hard question, I guess, too. It's easy, especially in this setting, in an energy institute, to talk about all of the above, and that makes a lot of sense. But I want to dive in, like, is there a tension? Is there a tension between energy sources? And some of you work on projects across both sides of it, but is there fundamentally a policy, legal, capital flows tension between renewables and, call it, oil and gas?
I think there's way more tension than there needs to be, because I think we need to build everything. Austin made the point, which I'm sure we'll talk about where's the future going, but maybe just to get there, right? We need so much more electricity. A a search, a Google search compared to a Chat GPT search is 10 times more electricity. We're moving in all this direction of data centers and AI and all of that. We just need so much more. And we need more renewables, we need more gas plants, like we are going to need everything. And so I think if everyone could stop fighting about which one and just say, let's build both because we really need both right now, I think we could be focusing a lot more energy into actually solving the problem than just having it have to be this either or thing.
I think I've in particular, I've noticed a real, that some of that tension is getting alleviated, like more recently. I mean, certainly post-COVID, there was a lot of tension because for a short period of time, there was almost this existential threat to more traditional oil and gas. I mean, you had like negative prices, and there was this just huge, pendulum swing. It always moves too far, and you had Texas, policies and politicians that are basically banning, private equity from investing in the state if they've sworn off energy and all this stuff. But more recently, I would say in the last 6 to 12 months, to your point, I think people are realizing that we need all the above, and you see a lot of traditional energy companies that are capitalizing on this. I mean, we have a lot of clients that, the one thing you don't hear with some of the current administration as much as like trying to get rid of the IRA and stuff like that. And a lot of that's because, the oil and gas companies are, some of the biggest beneficiaries of that. And so I feel like that, totally agree that there's been a lot of tension. There's more than there should, but I've started to really kind of notice that everybody's starting to see that this power revolution, the pie is going to be massive, and there's going to be a lot of winners all the way around, and we're going to need everybody.
That's the question. Is it coming from some kind of pragmatic consensus, or is it coming from this just tsunami of demand that's...
I think it's a tsunami of demand. I don't think that there's companies and decision makers are always going to act in their best interest, right? And I think right now in the market, you see that it's in everybody's best interest that we've got to fill this massive gap that there's going to be between like demand and the current pace of supply, at least on the power side.
Well, the other thing is, I think, yes, the ESG kind of movement that came right after COVID, in some ways, there was definitely a lot of political, pieces of that, but there was also the fact that, the industry I serve, the industry we serve, was not doing a very good job stewarding its investors' money. And it was almost, in addition to the political wins, there was a convenient kind of cop-out for a lot of capital providers. Yep. There were some people who were doing it on political lines, and where it all trickles down is our clients' capital sources got dried up because of either ESG or maybe the inconvenient or the convenient piece that public companies were not returning money to shareholders. So as that has changed, both on the political side and our industry getting things in order, capital's come back.
Yep.
And that is, kind of coupled by the whole, we can all make money now, and so it needs to be an all of the above approach.
Yeah.
So.
I think it's gotten better, over the years as renewables is like more mainstream, as there's more consensus around the fact that we do need to address climate change. Not only do we need to, meet the demand for energy, but we need to do both. I think it's just gotten much better. I noticed a big shift like around 2018, 2019. I was working for Total Energies, big oil and gas super major. They're formerly Total. They changed their name to Total Energies to be like, to kind of signal to the world that, okay, we're not just oil and gas, like we're gonna do other technologies as well. And it just seemed like it was just more of like a movement to be more, it's not, it's like a false choice. It's not an either or like sort of thing. We need all of the above.
So how is Texas going to do specifically into this new future with, with its own independent grid, with a very public failure of that grid 4 years ago, or whatever that was, with, a political establishment that is strongly pro-oil and gas, but with some interesting history toward renewables, maybe a pro-investment bent that colors that differently. Mm-hmm. But yet also with projections that ERCOT may need 50 gigawatts more of load, of generation by 2030. Like, how are we going to do?
I mean, I think we're blessed with a lot of resources to, you've got university lands out there getting into the game on a lot of these different technologies, and they've got a lot of land to use, especially, when you talk power, data centers, solar, wind. I mean, and we have an industry, not just the oil and gas industry, an energy industry that people get it. We have, a lot of talent as far as engineers and geosciences, and I think we're well positioned to take advantage of all the different opportunities. And I think that all these challenges are opportunities, and I think we've all really been the benefactor of throughout our careers. The shale revolution was a huge opportunity. I mean, you started seeing 28-year-old CEOs for these portfolio companies who were selling their company in a year and a half and making a lot of money. I mean, so as these things change and technologies come in vogue and, capital providers change, I mean, there is opportunity for all the different disciplines in this business. And there's a lot of translatable skills that go across from them. So I think Texas's workforce and their general, business environment is well suited for it.
Let me ask it differently, a little more provocatively. What could derail Texas's success, continued growth over the next 10, 20 years?
I think the back and forth fighting that we were talking about, right? I mean, if we have there's some bills in the legislature right now that would be very chilling to parts of the industry, they're very targeted at specific types of generation and not others. And instead of just saying let's help all generation get built like we need to, and they're very much meant to stop certain parts. And so if we do that, when we need to be, building everything, we're going to have really big problems. And then likewise, obviously, everything that's happening in DC right now. I mean, the tariffs in the last 24 hours, right? The cost of every single thing that we're talking about building is going up. And so how are we going to pay for all this? And at what point is this tension between this need for so much more electricity going to be met with the fact that people just aren't going to be paying for it at that level? And then what happens? I don't know the answer to that question. But so, I mean, that's where I think we need to be focused on what sort of policy can we be doing to build more, as opposed to things that are going to keep us from even building at the rate we have been, which even what we've been doing the last few years is not enough right now.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I don't think we can have a lot of these policies, or if they do get passed, that try and signal out and decide what type of, energy source, we can use. That is a very bad policy. If it can be done economically, we need to allow it, because, I mean, you just look at these projections, and I mean, even if at a discount on, what the expectation is for demand, we're going to have a hard time filling it on the supply side.
How does oil and gas deal flow do if oil goes to $50 a barrel and steel's 25% more expensive?
Yeah, it's not a good environment.
No.
It makes it harder to drill, and it makes services companies get slashed because they don't need as many, not as many rigs, not as many operations. And I mean, those are the boom and bust cycles, but that we've all experienced 2 or 3 different times now since the start of our careers, which they're unfortunate, but they happen. I think as far as but a lot of that's, I mean, it's a global pricing market. So I mean, I think a lot of the derailing that could come from is at the government and policy level is trying to pick winners and losers, instead of, like Chad said, just get out of the way and let all this stuff happen. And I think that, there's several podcasts that you can listen to that are really good about this, but, they made the point that if it's not a top down, you have to do it this way, forcing policy to, drive where the industry is going to go, if you free it up, then people who have competitive advantages in different areas are going to specialize, and that's how technology will evolve more seamlessly and more naturally. But back to Texas, I mean, I think we have the elements to drive forward technologies in a bunch of different areas, given the natural resources and the workforce and all the things that we are blessed with as a state.
And I think it's good, particularly in Texas, that a lot of the biggest, new demand is coming on, the data centers and things like that. They don't necessarily need to be right next to a population center. And fortunately, where all our energy is at is not near, population centers. And so that's why you're seeing so many of these projects out in West Texas and kind of the middle of nowhere. And it's really a great environment. You've got cheap land, you've got low regulation, you've got abundant energy source, and a lot of that energy source has had nowhere to go. I mean, for years we've just been flaring the gas in the air because the infrastructure hasn't been there to get it to a source case. I mean,
Still not there.
It's still not there. I mean, I was, talk about different things in our career. I was, working on a lot of like crypto mining units and businesses, just trying to do it. And now we have the data centers and we have use cases that we can do, and we can just put it right there, and we don't need all the infrastructure. So I think that there's some real opportunity for Texas in particular to be a leader on a lot of different fronts, as long as we don't
Do
get
y'all
in our
think,
way.
is Texas going to win this data center game? Like, are we going to get more data centers to come here? Then follow-up question, is that really winning? Is that a good thing, or does that create new grid instability or something to that effect?
Well, I think you'll see behind the meter is another,
Exactly.
interesting, like kind of co-locate the generation with the data center so it's not even interrupting the grid. And what's really good about that is you don't have to build transmission lines and all of those. So I mean, that's a huge piece of our firm's business that we've been looking at. But yeah, I think it's a win to get these things in there. Hopefully, it gets a new transmission system built too. Or distribution.
We have microphones up here, so I guess I want to give an opportunity for people to come up and ask questions. And while people are doing that, if they have questions, I want to pose another one that we keep kind of floating around. I guess Becky probably brought it up, but Texas isn't the sunniest state. It isn't the windiest state. It's close, maybe. It doesn't have the most oil and gas. It has quite a lot. But so really, can you point to other policies like the CREZ lines or something like that? What are other policies or frameworks in the Texas regulatory environment that really have made this such an energy superpower in the last couple decades?
I mean, historically, it has been, and at least as of today, is still a very easy place to build any type of power plant comparatively, right? The permitting regime is low. Somebody comes to me with a new deal, and and we're talking about who all would we need involved. The permitting is like really low on the list of things that we need to worry about because it is such an environment of let's build. And I think that's why I get so worried when we see things that might make that change, because that is a huge reason that it's so easy. Having our own electric grid has also been really helpful. Obviously, it sometimes has its challenges, but what it has done is allow us to move through the interconnection process much more quickly. So one of the things that is the single largest holdup in getting more projects of any type of power built in most of the country is how backed up the interconnection queues are. And so it takes years to get through the studies and get your chance to get your interconnection agreement so that you can build your project and connect it to the grid. So behind the meter avoids that. If you're somewhere you can do behind the meter, but the fact that we've been able to do that so quickly and efficiently in Texas is one of the big reasons it's been so easy to build here.
Yep. Is that a question?
I'm circulating the mic, so.
Hello, my name is Megan. I am a pre-law student here at UT, and I am planning on entering the energy industry. The number one thing that I've heard that I should do in preparation of that career is learn everything that I can about the industry, but I found it very difficult because I've learned as I went along that everything is mangled with political motivations, and I've had a really hard time finding non-political, politically neutral sources of information on the energy industry. And so I was wondering if you have any voices or sources or places where I could go to or young students could go to for information on the industry, specifically on the legal or political regulation side of things.
A little less legal, but like on the Vaclav Smil is one of the best, and UT's own Scott Tinker from the former Vaclav Smil, S-M-I-L, is one of the best kind of neutral observers and studiers of energy and energy systems and how we use energy. Actually, I think his best book is called Energy and Civilization, is a great one. And Scott Tinker, formerly the head of the Bureau of Economic Geology here, also does some really phenomenal numbers-based rather than ideology-based works. But those are less legal answers, but I'm curious.
Yeah, I don't know of a legal one, but Arjun Murthy is another guy who his podcast is called Super Spiked, and he does a video and just a weekly podcast. But he's he's very on the level, thinks about it more of like an investment analyst. So it is driven to the economic side of things. And then There's a really interesting one called Veriton Close of Business Tuesday, which is Maynard Holt was at Tudor Pickering and Holt. He now has somebody come in and I mean, they're big names, everything from like Daniel Yergin to Scott Tinker to, and he'll have lawyers, he'll have bankers, he'll have engineers. He had, just people from Canada whenever the tariffs got announced, and they can kind of, it is pretty even keel and not slided towards one way or the other.
Yeah, there's a question over there, but while I'm bringing you your mic, I'll just put a plug in for the Longhorn Energy Club. I don't know if you saw the panel before this, but there, we have several student clubs who are full of students just like you trying to just learn about energy. Longhorn Energy Club is one of them. There are several others. We have the TechC program, which is a little more focused on entrepreneurship and innovation, but if you want to be surrounded by a bunch of energy nerds on campus, that's a great one. So there are these student organizations and ways to get involved in organizing Energy Week. We're always looking for help on that as well.
I just realized too, we should have said the Texas Journal of Oil, Gas, and Energy Law.
Yeah, there you go.
You need to go back and read.
Especially for you.
There's 20 years of issues on this, so yeah, go read that. George.
You're right here. The KBH Energy Center, I've been coming here ever since they started. And the thing that amazed me is I learned things that the liberal press was not telling me. And if you just stick around with the KBH Center, the various conferences they have, the speakers they have, and you'll have more unbiased information about the energy business that you'll get anywhere else.
Good plug. Any other questions? I'm going to do a last round of last word. Go ahead, I guess. Or Chad, do you want to start? Give us, what is the future? What does the future of energy look like, and what do you see your role being in it going forward?
I guess the good and bad about being an attorney, at least at a law firm, is we decide less where it's going and facilitate where other folks are driving it, which is kind of fun. And so I'm just excited to continue to be a part of it and look forward to, being on many more first transactions that, for me at least, are the most intellectually exciting because it's something new that I've got to figure out and draw from different things.
Yeah, no, I agree with Chad. I mean, that is one of the best parts of our job. But just with the pendulum swinging back over and all above approach taking hold, I mean, just getting to do the role for traditional energy, I think is going to be a big one, and it's going to be the future both domestically and internationally is going to be really exciting for traditional energy.
I mean, I think the biggest trend I'm seeing nowadays is just the dramatic demand for power in the U.S. It's projected to increase 50% over the next 15 years. Driven by the electrification of the economy, the electrification of transport, demand from data centers. So I think despite kind of some of the headwinds that you see in the policy world, I think that the trend will continue, that we need much more power. And that includes, lots of different technologies and sources. So that's kind of what I'm interested to see how that plays out. And in terms of new technologies or newer ones, I think offshore wind is really fascinating. With the turbine sizes increasing, the amount of power that can be generated is just massive. So right now things are kind of on pause there, but if you look around the world and see some of those projects, I think that's pretty exciting. And I'm also very interested in nuclear fusion, which is a little bit of a ways out, but there are some really super exciting advances technologically that are happening there. So if I was, a young law student, back then I tried to think about where could I become an expert on something right away where there's not that many. For me, it was solar energy back then, but if I was in law school today, I might be looking at, some of those things.
Would you venture a date on nuclear?
On fusion? I think we're going to start seeing some commercial deployment in the 2030s, spotty. And, over the next decades, yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say from there, but could be a little early, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at the nearer term future, I mean, we've talked about the challenges to development, but at the end of the day, when you have such a demand, people will figure out how to do supply. I mean, that is what the development process is. It's figuring out how to solve problems. And every few years, what those problems are and what those challenges are change. But these industries, I mean, I think Austin said earlier, I mean, have just incredible amount of talent that does a great job of figuring out how to solve these problems. And so I think there may be some bumps along the way in how much we build year in and year out in the next couple of years. But I think that we're going to have to figure out a way to meet this demand, and I think we will. And then I totally agree with Cynthia. When you look a little bit further out than that, it's technology we probably aren't, well, I would say we may not be thinking of. The engineers sitting here that are doing all the research, you guys should be the ones telling us, because when you look 10, 20, 30 years out, I mean, if we looked 20, 30 years ago like we just did, there's technology. We weren't expecting the shale revolution. We weren't expecting all these technologies on the renewable side. You guys probably know what the next things are, or at least that you're working on, and hopefully some of them are going to work. And what we're building will be totally different. And to me, that's the most exciting thing, is that it constantly is changing, and that I have no doubt what we will be building in 20 years will look a little bit different, and we'll solve these problems even better.
We're the industry that powers every other industry. All right, a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you.